Most people say that your landing zone at the craps table should be about 6 inches away from the end of the table when you're throwing the dice. I'm here to say that I really don't think that that might be the case. Hey, my name is Joe and this is my Craps Master dice shooting journey. Let's make it yours as well. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that I have 2 things coming up towards the end of the video that you really don't want to miss. So make sure you watch all the way to the end of the video to find out what those 2 things are. So let's jump right into it and explore this thought of a landing zone or a sweet spot at the craps table. Now there's 2 different schools of thought when it comes to finding your landing zone at the craps table. Each craps table that you walk up to might have a slightly different spot or sweet area that you want to try to land the dice in because of the table's surface. School number 1 talks about the dice going down the table, landing, and then bouncing up and hitting the back end of the table in that upward motion. So in other words, you're going to throw the dice, they're going to hit the table in what you call your landing zone or that sweet spot and bounce up and hit the end of the table at a predetermined spot or an area that you want them to hit. Bounce off and rest gently near or at the side of the table. School number 2 goes through and takes the opposite side of the story. So in other words, you're throwing the dice, they're going to hit that sweet spot or that landing zone that you are aiming for, and they're going to bounce up, and then they're going to come down before they hit the back wall. And the goal here is to hit the bottom of the wall as close to the table as possible in order to have the dice just gently roll off and come to rest at the end of the table. Now let's take a look at both schools of thought. School 1, like I said, is throwing in the landing zone, come in and hit a table at the end of the table on an upward trajectory. And the goal is to have them bounce off or back off the table and come immediately to rest right next to the back wall or within an inch of the back wall, still on axis. And the goal is when it bounces off still on axis, that there's very minimal energy left in the dice so they stick to the table. And hey, click on the link on the top right hand corner there, and that'll help go through the proper throwing height so that way you can minimize that energy that's stored in the dice. And that way you have a better chance of having them stick at the end of the table when they bounce off the wall. Now for all this to happen, you want to make sure that you find that landing zone or that sweet spot for the dice to react exactly how you're saying they're going to react. They're going to come to rest and they're going to die right on the table. For bouncy tables or tables that are a little bit softer, that landing zone might be closer to the table than what that 6-inch mark is that everybody says you need to aim for. So you're going to adjust that landing zone closer with this school of thought so that way when it bounces up, it's going to hit and then come right back down. For a harder surface table, it's not going to be quite as bouncy. It's not going to throw it up quite as fast. So you're going to have to move that landing zone back a little bit further and make the adjustments at the table. So that way you're hitting that one specific spot on the end of the table, back wall, so they just roll off. The second school of thought claims that it's going to throw the dice down the table, it's going to hit the table, it's going to bounce up, and then it's going to hit the end of the table, which is a requirement for throwing a dice, on its downward trajectory. And if this is the case, the goal is when it hits the bottom of the table or near the bottom of the table, that the dice will just roll off and come to rest immediately after hitting or touching that back wall. Problem with this is any slight deviation, any slight change of the dice patterns or trajectory or movement is going to be projected and it's going to be amplified in the result of the dice when they hit the table. In other words, if they come off a little bit too hard, it's going to hit the bottom of the table. It's going to throw them a lot further down the table or away from the back wall than what you want to, which is obviously going to randomize it. If they come off the back end just a little bit crooked, the corners are going to touch and it's going to throw them. And we'll cover more about that type of stuff in our next few videos when we talk about analyzing your dice throws. Now I'm thinking just by listening to me talk, you guys know which school that I side with. I obviously side with school number one. For me personally, I want to find that landing zone so that when it bounces off, it hits my targeted area on the end of the table. And for me, my target area is about 1 to 2 inches up from the table on the end of the table. So it's not very high up. So if my dice are hitting up higher, it's going to hit those diamonds and it's going to throw them all around. I want to try to hit that bottom diamond on the bottom of that point. So that way, that's where my dice come, hit, and just fall and rest or die right away, basically. Keeping that in mind, my landing zone tends to be really super close to the end of the table. So it's a lot closer than that 6-inch mark that everybody keeps on talking about. So how do I personally practice trying to get my dice to land exactly where I want them to do? This is the first of the two things that I promised in the beginning of the video I would cover. I make a target landing zone that I can put on the table and practice the dice hitting into that zone so I can adjust where that landing sweet spot is going to be. And how I made these little pieces of cloth, actually it's the remnants from my table layout, the microfiber for the table layout. I cut 3 different size circles onto that microfiber. I started with a 6-inch circle, a 4.5-inch circle, and a 3.5-inch circle. So watch this little cutout here on how I made those circles for practice. Okay, this is how I want to make my targets. I have a, it's actually a sour cream container thing, and it measures 6 inches around. That's gonna be target number 1. Target number 2 is gonna be the top of a peanut butter jar. It's 4.5 inches round, and it's just a smaller container. We got 3.5 inches around. And the first one's gonna be our sour cream container lid. Just gonna draw a circle around it. Next one's gonna be the peanut butter lid. Draw a circle around it again. And the last one's just a container lid. And all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut them out then. Now the goal for finding my landing zone is to aim small, miss small. So in other words, I'm gonna start with that 6-inch target that we just got done cutting out, and I'm gonna place it at the end of the table. And I'm gonna toss the dice down there so they go at the proper height and they come down with the least amount of energy and they hit the top of that 6-inch circle, somewhere in that circle near the end of the table. And I'm gonna be adjusting that landing zone around the end of the table so I can find my spot where the dice bounce off and they bounce up and they hit the table exactly where I want them to hit. Once I find that sweet spot, I'm gonna keep on practicing that 6-inch circle as many times as I can so that way the dice land exactly where I want them. Now, once I get that 6-inch circle down path and I feel comfortable throwing it so it hits that landing zone, I will take this 6-inch and I'll go down to the 4.5-inch circle. And I will put it exactly where that 6-inch target is. And I'm gonna throw the dice down there and I'm gonna see if I can first of all get the dice to land within that 4.5-inch circle, but also if that 4.5-inch circle produces the same result as the 6-inch circle when they hit the back wall. Again, I'm gonna repeat the process, get it down comfortable. Once I get comfortable, I'm gonna turn that 4.5-inch circle into that 3.5-inch circle, and I'm gonna put that at the end of the table as well. And we're gonna throw the dice down, hit the 3.5-inch circle, hopefully, bounce up, hit the end of the wall, exactly where I want them to land. So like I said, the goal is to aim small and miss small. In other words, aim small, have them hit off the back end of the table exactly where I want them, or at least very close to where I want them to hit, and then have them roll off with very minimal energy and land on the end of the table and stick. And now for promise number 2 that I promised in the beginning of this in the video is let's take a look at what you could do When you get to the craps table, and remember, every craps table is different. The table surface is different. The environment is different. The way the dice bounce off the table are different. So when you get to the table, you're going to follow everything that we've covered in the video so far. So you're going to find your position. You're going to find your stance. You're going to find your dice set, your grips. You get all that stuff down already, guys. So make sure that your hands are dry. Use your shirt, use your pants. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll rub my hands on the table surface just to get my fingers dry and grasp the dice with whatever grip you decide. Look down the table, find your landing spot. Hopefully that landing spot is free and clear of any landmines or AKA chips or other people's hands for that matter. And that really sucks. That really upsets me. But find that landing zone and then fire the dice off and try to get them to land in that landing zone, that sweet spot that you have always practiced. If the dice land exactly, and again, what I'm looking for is where they land on the end of the table, not on the surface, but on the wall of the table. That's my goal. If they're hitting that spot, then you know you found your landing zone. Then you know that you have hit that sweet spot. Try to reproduce that throw 2 to 3 more times. Once you can do that, what you're going to go do is you're going to throw one time to spot number 2, and look at the chart on the screen right now. We'll show you where spot number 2 is. And then we're gonna go one time to spot number 3, and then we're gonna go one time to 4, and then one time to spot number 5. Sometimes in doing this, what's gonna happen is you're gonna find a spot that is actually better than what your original intended landing zone was. So in other words, you're gonna throw it down, the dice are gonna just barely touch the back wall, and they're going to stop and they're going to stick. So in other words, they're going to come down, they're going to hit that back wall, and they come down and just stick right to the table. And they're going to do on axis, and they're going to do exactly how you want them to land. If spot number 2, 3, 4, or 5 is not better than spot number 1, go back to your original spot and keep that as your landing zone. But if 2, 3, 4, or 5 is better than number 1, make sure that you stick with that new spot. And that's where that spot's going to be for that table, that particular time, that particular day that you're there. And keep in mind that every time you go to the casino, your throw might be slightly different. You're going to find a different landing zone. Even if it is the same table, you are shooting from the same spot. Different body mechanics, different things that happen on that particular day might throw it off a little bit. So always go through this process every single time that you step up to the table. Hey, if you're finding value in these videos, please make sure that you give me a thumbs up. Make sure that you subscribe if you haven't done so already. And also please share these videos and get the word out so we can spread this message to more and more people. Hey, to find out more about Dice Influence and my introduction to it, click on that video on the right hand side there, and that'll take you to that. Hey, my name is Joe. This is my dice shooting journey. Please make it yours as well.